Hey, what's up you guys? Welcome back to Team APS, Paul here. So, since Chaos Emperor Dragon and Cyberstein just came off the ban list, I thought a fitting video to talk about would be cards that got unbanned and kind of ended up flopping. So in Yu-Gi-Oh, of course, when cards are broken, they get banned. You know, this is unfair, it's overpowered, it has to go. But later down the line, sometimes years later, we get these cards off the ban list, and players are always really excited about that because, you know, you get to see your favorite old school cards and see if they can still make the same impact that they did. And the stories when that happens can vary a lot, because sometimes cards will come off the ban list and just sort of be useful but not super powerful. For example, that's like Imperial Order right now. And then there's also cards that end up being too strong and have to go right back on the ban list. So, for example, Snatch Steal. But then there are the cards that kind of just come off the ban list and get forgotten about entirely. And so in this video, I'm going to talk about several of them and why I think that happened. But not before a quick plug of Inked Gaming. So they're one of the channel's sponsors, and if you want to get an awesome playmat like this, or a cool nifty playmat bag, or any custom mat of your own, you can check out their website and be sure to use the code APS10 for 10% off anything. So yeah, check them out. All right, let's hop in. So the first card I wanted to start with is Monster Reborn, because it's not a particularly egregious one, right? Monster Reborn's used today, and its history is pretty mixed though. Early on Monster Reborn, you can see why this type of card would get banned. It summons any monster from either player's graveyard, and poof, like it's there. You can get back a powerful boss monster just straight from the graveyard, and it could be something that, you know, nukes the board or just like can attack multiple times and you win out of nowhere and your opponent feels like angry and cheated. And you can see why that's a problem. But today, I don't really think that Monster Reborn has made that same impact. In fact, it's not even used in a lot of decks. So when you think of, say, stun decks, like, you know, Altergeist, for instance, they don't really run Monster Reborn. Pendulums is an entire mechanic that doesn't really run Monster Reborn. And you see it run as like an extender in a lot of combo decks, you know, the Dark Warrior decks that are still like kind of running around, stuff like that. They'll always run Monster Reborn. It's just a way to like push a combo a little bit further. But as staples go, I actually don't really see it getting run a whole lot. Lower tier decks are able to use Monster Reborn to pretty good effect, but I think that the reason why it's not as powerful today as it was in the past is really just because the value of a single monster in Yu-Gi-Oh right now is just so much lower. I think, you know, back in the day when boss monsters took a lot more effort to get out and they felt more like menacing on the field, they had more of a presence, the idea of Monster Reborn being able to like summon one back for free felt just very unfair. Today though, so many monsters replace themselves when they die, and a lot of times monsters are just used as ladders in a combo, so most things aren't actually worth resummoning. And in fact, link monsters sometimes aren't worth resummoning just because they might not have their arrows pointing in the direction you want anymore. So the second card is Blackluster Soldier, Envoy of the Beginning. This is another really strong boss monster of an older time, I guess. You summon it by banishing a light monster and a dark monster from your graveyard, and it's pretty big. It's got like the Blue Eyes White Dragon stats, and its effects aren't bad. It can attack twice, and it also can banish a monster that your opponent controls. You get either of those effects, and it's, you know, it's pretty good. But I think the main problem comes from the fact that boss monsters today are so much more accessible. It's a lot easier to summon boss monsters out, and like I was saying about Monster Reborn, a lot of boss monsters are actually searchable, or they just, the value of them is lower because you can like pump out, say, 2 of them, for instance. And Blackluster Soldier still has problems like being unsearchable, it's kind of hard to recover, it's not really part of an archetype, so you won't really get the same synergies you would necessarily get by running an on-theme boss monster, for instance. So all in all, I think that while Blackluster Soldier is good, it's not great. It's better than Monster Reborn in a lot of ways though, because there are some decks that use it as a prominent boss monster. Some things that come to mind are like Burning Abyss and Thunder Dragons, for instance. So it's totally not a dead card, but probably not one that lived up to its true potential. And now the card's at 3, and well, I don't think anyone's really complaining about that. Next card, Rika Key. So Rika Key is a pretty powerful, simple card. It's got that like, you know, retro style Yu-Gi-Oh effect where it's just like one line of broken text, right? Rika Key destroys your opponent's board. Like, all their monsters get destroyed and that's it. This, you can see why in the past this would be just overwhelmingly strong. I mean, it's a sacky spell. Your opponent's been building this board for like turn over turn over turn. They're about to beat you. You top deck Rika Key, smash, their board's gone. And now you probably win the game because you summon something and start attacking, or you just make a comeback. it's funny that this card's back, and that's not really how it's like going down. I mean, we've already gotten Dark Hole back, and it's at 1, and this card, I think the reason why Raigeki is able to exist is because monsters float. A lot of monsters, when they're destroyed, will just search or summon something else out or get something back to your hand or whatever. And there's also a sect of boss monsters that just straight up don't die. I mean, a lot of boss monsters, like, just can't be destroyed by card effects, for instance. And that means that Raigeki itself is not a very powerful card if it can't actually get rid of things on the opponent's board. And then you still get back to those problems of monsters having less individual value today. You can destroy 2 or 3 monsters on your opponent's board, and their next turn they can just quickly replace them all because decks, due to power creep, are just a lot stronger today. And then you also have some other things. Like Raigeki, for instance, will never win you the game. It can destroy your opponent's cards, but if you have nothing else in your hand to do, then Raigeki only destroyed their cards and you still won't win, and it's their turn again, they might go crazy and make another board. Also, Raigeki's not actually a combo piece, and in a game that's become very first turn centric, opening with Raigeki's not great, right? I mean, if you open with it, that could have been a combo piece, that could have been a starter play. Instead, it's this card that won't even be useful on your first turn, and your deck might be so strong that wiping your opponent's board out isn't even really something that you need to do. So another card is Super Polymerization. Now, this is a card that you can read it and definitely see where it felt a little bit like, mechanically broken, right? It is a quick play spell, and it lets you do a fusion summon with monsters on either player's side of the field. So you can use your opponent's monsters to make, whatever fusion monster you plan on summoning. There's like Mud Dragon of the Swamp is kind of a new example that might be useful, but back in the day, people would use this with, say, Elemental Heroes to use your opponent's attribute monster and then make the accompanying hero monster. Same with Shaddolls, for instance. They can make fusion monsters of any attribute. And since you're using your opponent's monsters, it kind of pays for the discard that you have to do to use it. But there's still more because this card can't be responded to. So your opponent can't actually negate it, even with Solemn Warning, for instance. So that kind of protection makes it feel very strong. It came back to 1 though, and it doesn't seem like it's really doing anything. And why is that? Well, I think it's got a couple of reasons. First of all, the card's not easily searchable. I mean, yes, you can search this with something like, say, Predaplant over Scorpio, but oftentimes there are better things to search, like Brilliant Fusion and Instant Fusion. Also, the card is a bit steep. Discarding does suck, right? And there aren't that many great generic extra deck cards that you would necessarily be able to summon with it. And then there's the question of, do you want to commit the extra deck space to a monster that isn't necessarily going to be useful to you in any context outside of the one Super Polymerization your deck has access to? Then we get back into the idea that boss monsters and just monsters in general aren't as valuable on a per monster basis as they used to be. Your opponent might lose a powerful monster, but they might be able to just replace it next turn. And those things all, I think, compound to make Super Polymerization not necessarily feel like the power card it once was. All right, next let's talk about Morphing Jar. So this is one that definitely felt like, it probably could have come back a lot sooner than it did. Morphing Jar has both players discard their hands and then draw 5 cards. It got banned because, all the jar cards are kind of seen as controversial. They do a mass kind of board state reset, either all the monsters in the field or the monsters in the hand or whatever. And we'll definitely never really see Fiber Jar coming back, I think. But Morphing Jar came back. And in its time, the card was very good. If you had no cards in your hand, then Morphing Jar was a huge plus and you could replenish yourself. Also, if you're playing a deck like Dark World that benefits hugely from the discard of Morphing Jar, then it became one of your power cards. But I think that today, it's really just too slow. Flip effect monsters are virtually unseen in Yu-Gi-Oh! In 2019, and it's been that way for several years now, honestly. So the idea of a monster that you have to set face down and just kind of end your turn with that, and then your opponent swings into it. Sometimes that's just not enough. If your opponent attacks Morphing Jar, they might already have game on the board, and it's just going to be collateral damage and get blown away anyway. Or it might be that Morphing Jar helps your opponent when you do the discard. But the fact of the matter is, really, Morphing Jar is just slow. It's not part of any particular theme, so you can't search this card. And that in and of itself means you might rather just run an archetype-specific, themed card. So going along with Morphing Jar, we've got Card Destruction. Now this is one that I was actually super unsure of when it first came off the ban list last year, because Card Destruction is like, it's a spell. It's a little bit faster to play than Morphing Jar. Both players discard their hands and draw the same number of cards that they both discarded. This can be really insane. I mean, this basically means you get to mulligan in a sense, but it can actually be even stronger than that. If you're playing a deck like Dangers or Dark Worlds, then it's an extremely good power card. And I think a lot of people suspected that, oh, Card Destruction came off the ban list as a way to help Dangers. But you don't even necessarily see it played in those decks. I mean, pure Danger in and of itself is hard to really play. We don't see it getting a lot of mainstream success. I've seen Card Destruction used in a few combo decks, but what I think people are finding is that decks are already consistent enough on their own. So maybe back in the day you would use Card Destruction if you had a bad hand, but today's decks don't really get bad hands. I mean, you have so many ways to search out combo pieces and recycle things. Why would you really bother running something like Card Destruction? And, you know, in addition to the advent of hand traps and things, maybe you don't want to use Card Destruction because you don't want to lose all the hand traps you've got. You could say, oh, well, it can get your opponent's hand traps out of their hand, but not really, because they might just draw more of them. You might even be helping your opponent in general with Card Destruction, because what if they're playing a Danger deck, or what if they're just playing, you know, anything like Burning Abyss, where maybe they want their monsters to go to the grave to get effects. All in all, it kind of reminds me of things like Monster Reborn and Rika Key, where it just doesn't quite have a place in any particular combo. Okay, and the last card is going to be Solemn Judgment. So, Solemn Judgment, it has a very proud history, I guess you could say. The Solemn cards are strong, right? These cards are traps they're counter traps, right? You know, you can't really chain to them easily, and they say no. And back in its time, Solemn Judgment was really one of a kind. This was a card that, you know, your opponent has a big play that's about to beat you, and you can pay half your life points to say, no, I don't want you to do that. You don't get to, you know, activate that spell or trap. You don't get to summon that monster. And it covered nearly everything. The only thing it can't negate is straight up monster effects. But that still means it can negate a Synchro Summon or a Link Summon or, you know, whatever. It can negate the summon of Dark Armed or Judgment Dragon. Like, those are big ones maybe back in the day. You can negate, you know, that powerful Monster Reborn, or, you know, that Card Destruction that might ruin your day. But what happened? Okay, so first of all, it's two things. Obviously, trap cards are not as prevalent in Yu-Gi-Oh! As they were back in the day. I mean, honestly, traps aren't even used right now if it's not like evenly matched or infinite impermanence, or maybe you're playing like a stun deck or something where you've got lots of floodgates. But just the idea of regular traps is actually kind of a dying concept right now. And then also, Solemn Judgment itself has been power crept by other Solemn cards. Solemn Warning came out afterwards. It's limited to one, but, you know, it kind of covers more bases, or at least more important bases. It can negate any summon. It can also negate any monster effect that summons. It gets you out of pinches honestly better than Judgment does. And if you use it early game, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a very early game centric kind of thing right now, you'll actually be paying less life points. And then there's Solemn Strike, which kind of blows even both of them out of the water. It's 1,500 life points and negates any special summon or a monster effect. And Yu-Gi-Oh's all about its monster effects. So really and truly, Solemn Judgment just hasn't seen play. I mean, when it first got unbanned, we did see it in some main decks and a few side decks, but since then, it's just fizzled out. I mean, when Solemns themselves aren't being run, you honestly can't expect the oldest and most antiquated of them to be run. So those are some of the cards that have come off the ban list and just haven't really been able to live up to their legacy. I think that there is an important takeaway though, and that's that a lot of cards on the ban list could probably come back and not really affect things. Like I said at the start of the video, we've got Chaos Emperor Dragon back. Yes, with his errata that makes him not maybe as good, and we've got Cyberstein. And I honestly wouldn't be surprised to see them both just kind of flop. So maybe we'll be able to get other banned cards back. You know, a card I've always wanted to see is, say, Pot of Avarice, for instance. That's a really good one. So let me know down in the comments, what other cards do you think could come off the ban list and honestly not make much impact? You know, for better or worse. I want to know. I'll be responding, I'll be reading, and that's pretty much going to be it. So remember guys, check out Inked Gaming, use APS 10 for 10% off, and follow me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter, of course subscribe for more Yu-Gi-Oh! And I'll see you guys in the next one. Pass turn.